Hello, and welcome everyone. It's wonderful to have you all here today. My name is Albena, and I'm excited to be joined by these three remarkable people who have shaped the way organizations think, operate, and evolve. And I'll admit, with a panel like this one, my main job today is to simply not to get in their way. First, ladies first, I'll start with the lovely Valentina Mazzocco from Concidi, a long-standing and trusted Businessmap partner. She brings exceptional expertise in enterprise decision-making and organizational governance. Insights we're delighted to have in the room today. And then, of course, two names that most of you instantly recognize. Nigel Thurlow, former chief of Agile at Toyota, creator of the award-winning Scrum the Toyota Way, and co-creator of the Flow system. He is a leading expert in organizational design and business agility and a globally recognized keynote speaker and author. And then we have Dave Snowden, creator of the Kinepin framework and one of the most influential thinkers in complexity, sense-making, and organizational resilience. His work has shaped modern approaches to decision-making under uncertainty, and he is a globally recognized speaker and advisor to governments and major organizations. Together, the three of them bring a rare combination of leadership, flow, governance, and complexity thinking, which means that we're in a good for an exceptional conversation. A quick housekeeping note before we dive in. Yes, there will be a recording. Everyone who registered for the event will receive the full session recording after it. We'll also have a dedicated Q&A session at the end. Please make sure to submit any questions you have inside the Q&A panel. We'd love to hear from you. Okay. Now we're ready to unpack today's theme, so let's dive in. On that note, I'll hand it over to you, Valentina, to kick us off.
Okay. Thank you, Albina, for your introduction and for giving me this big opportunity. It's a real honor to be here with Nigel and Dave. Some years ago, I had the privilege to be one of Nigel's students, and I learned from him how important it is to apply agility in a practical way. And Dave's work, especially the Synaphin framework, is a key reference for understanding complexity and making decisions in uncertain situations. So being here today is not something for me that happens every day. It's a bit like standing between giants, but also a big opportunity to keep learning. So I hope I can give a small contribution to our discussion on how organizations can face the challenges of complexity and enterprise agility. I'd like to briefly share some background about myself because I think it will help you understand my point of view. I have been working at Concidi for 11 years. Concidi is an Italian management consulting firm, mainly working in Italy, but in the last years also more and more abroad. Our goal is to help our clients, usually manufacturing or service companies, to increase the value they give to their own customers. And how we do this? We bring methods and tools that go from Agile to Lean, or better, the TPS, the Toyota Production System, which we like a lot because of its Japanese roots. And most of all, we work side by side with people. In our projects, we always start from a problem or from a challenge. We analyze it together with the client's teams to understand the as-is situation. And then we design together the to-be solutions. Our approach is concrete and collaborative. We want to help companies solve their challenges and execute their strategies. But at the same time, we want to help people grow in the spirit of continuous improvement. Today, I would like to share with you a part of this experience, speaking about Agile, and in particular about what it really means for me to apply and adopt Agile inside organizations. When we talk about Agile, we immediately enter the world of complexity. Here, I connect directly to Dave's Synaphin framework. There are contexts where cause and effect are clear and predictable, and we can plan in a linear way. But there are also contexts where things change quickly, and we cannot know in advance which solution will work. This is the complex domain where we don't start from one right answer. We need to explore, run small experiments, learn, and then adapt again and again. This is exactly the type of situation where Agile makes the most sense. And here, I'm not talking about software development, just to be clear. In my experience at company level, we are in this type of complex context. For example, when we talk about new product development, where customer needs change over time, or engineer to order projects, where each project is different from the previous one. And all those complex and cross-functional initiatives that start from, for example, a new business challenge. So when we work in this situation, we are not in a simple or complicated environment. We are in a complex space. And this is where Agile can truly be a powerful tool at the enterprise level. What I see very often is that when organizations try to apply Scrum, XP, Kanban, or other Agile frameworks in a very rigid way, it simply doesn't work because of real limits and business constraints. Some companies, after the first attempts, give up and say, okay, Agile doesn't work. Others think it's better to go back to the waterfall method. But they forget that they are moving in the world of complexity, where waterfall doesn't really fit anymore. I believe that Agile must be sustainable and coherent with the company's history, structure, mission, and people. Applying Agile doesn't mean choosing one framework and following it word by word, step by step. There is a real human dimension that we must consider. Otherwise, Agile will not last over time. And if we think about it, this is very similar to the Toyota production system, which has people and their development at its core. The most famous frameworks for me are important to study and understand because they are our basic building blocks. However, in real life, they are often too rigid or too prescriptive. In many companies, for example, it's very difficult to have someone working full-time as a Scrum Master or as a product owner. And sometimes a 2-week sprint doesn't match the real timing of the project. So maybe the purist of Agile will probably not agree with what I'm saying, but I don't think it makes sense to promote one framework against another or to be too rigid in the way we apply them and to fit the so-called framework wars. We need to be practical. We need to understand the context we are in, the company's goal, the people we have, the story of the company, its production constraints, and so on. Every company in the end has unique needs. So how we can really bring Agile to the enterprise level? In my opinion, we need to work with a variety of tools, logics, and Agile methods, which we can select and combine based on the real needs of the situation, without the pressure to follow a fixed path. In the world of complexity, we scale through the composition and recombination, not by imitation. And this is, for me, the key point. Every company must learn how to break down and reassemble its own way of working, its own way of being agile. And here, AI can become a very helpful partner. AI can help us quickly choose the best options for a specific context and reduce complexity by suggesting the most effective tools or methods. However, it's up to the company and to its people to decide how to use these tools in their own context. I would like to close with a concrete example. A recent and very important project that we have been working on for about a year at Considi with a client in the aerospace sector. The company was growing very fast in the market, but they also needed to be ready internally to support this big step. We started with a lean assessment, mapping the value streams of their processes. And for us, this is mandatory. It's a mandatory starting point because it allows us to really understand the context, the value for the customer, the variables and the constraints that the company needs to manage. From there, with AI's help to analyze the assessment data, we worked with the company to choose the best practices, organization methods, and ways of working to become more agile and to respond faster to change. In other words, the company has built its own way of being agile. And because I spoke before about the human side of Agile, I want to underline that we are carrying out this whole journey, this whole project, together with the HR director of this company. So this new way of being Agile is different from any other companies. It doesn't follow a specific framework, but it is sustainable over time. And this is, in the end, the most important thing. I will stop here. I hope I have given you some concrete ideas to take back to your organization. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Valentina.
I was settling back and enjoying myself, so but that's good. And I think you've given us some good thoughts. You were quoting Dave a little bit there, which was good. Or at least channeling the inner Dave. So I think that's good for us to start to talk about. You had something about this whole Agile thing, and of course, one of the things that we lost Valentina. We should bring her back, but there we go, because she's going to participate in this, I think. So. In the run up to this sort of event, when we were sort of talking about this, we were talking a lot about AI, the role of AI, how everybody's embracing ChatGPT and Perplexity and Gemini and all the rest of these LLMs that are out there, and this rush for companies to jump on the AI bandwagon. And Agile is dead, of course. Everybody knows Agile is dead, or so that we are being told. And so I thought it might be useful for Dave and I to have a conversation around some of these topics, and Valentina, if you at any time want to jump in, because I'm starting to realize that maybe AI isn't the great replacement. Maybe all these companies that thought AI would suddenly replace humans have got it wrong. And I've also started to realize that the Agile industrial complex is dead, and the sort of certification bandwagon, despite a few of the stalwarts, the sort of old guard trying to continue to sell certification. But agility is still very relevant. I don't know, Dave, what's your thoughts? I've got a whole bunch of thoughts going in my head, but before I go rambling off, I thought I'd ask your opinion.
I'm quite impressed you finally come round to what some of us have been saying for about 2 years in respect of AI, all right? So, and I think the one kind of interesting thing is the bubble around AI is going to be significantly more expensive and significantly faster bursting than the bubble around Agile. But both of them were bubbles. Right? It was somebody picked up something and then it sort of magnified. So Agile became about certification and training. People made money out of those. They didn't make money out of writing software code. But I think there's a more substantial issue here, and it comes into the whole lean issue. Is software development was seen as a manufacturing process. And I think that's why it picked up on the Toyota way. That's why it picked up on lean. That's why it picked up on flow. Once you start to get into a complex system, and the big thing we developed recently was called STRI mapping. And that was because I got fed up with people talking about flow. And I said one day in a conference call, it doesn't always go in one direction, guys. Sometimes it goes backwards. Yeah. So if I look in terms of, two, 3 points. One is in terms of strategy, which is where I'm working at the moment. You need to entangle tactics and strategy in one. It's not a flow from one to the other. You don't do risk assessment afterwards. They're all deeply entangled at a finely grained level from day one. So you can't create a flow. So that manufacturing model starts to break down. The other is software development, I think, is moving in that direction, and there's issues around that. But then fundamentally, the AI human difference, which a lot of us have said for some time, is human beings reason abductively, AI reasons inductively, and the two are radically different ways of thinking. And we need to stop anthropomorphizing it. It isn't intelligent, it's an algorithmic processing device for language. So you've got two confusions. One is the confusion of information with text, and the other is the confusion of knowledge with information. All right, so what we can write down is about 3 or 4% of what we know, and that's what we're training LLMs on. So it's not surprising they get that wrong. I mean, to be fair, I'm using them a lot at the moment. I'm sorry, could we leave everybody on the screen or nobody rather than just one?
No, I seem to have some camera issues, but keep going. We'll figure that out as we're going.
Yeah, very confusing, all right? Nigel broke his video, and I can't be trusted with
I'll get it back, don't worry.
Yeah, so I think one of the issues about LLM, I've just started to do something. If I give a talk, I transcribe it. I give it to DeepSeek, which I actually quite like, and I say, structure that as a white paper. It's actually really good at that, because I don't ask it to do any primary search. Yeah, I give it stuff and ask it to structure, and then the point is its training data sets will accommodate that. The evidence, and the last point I want to make is, and this is by the way jokingly earlier, we all thought that we would see cognitive decline if LLMs took off. We thought it would take a year. We didn't realize it would take weeks. So the evidence of cognitive decline is really scary.
And as we come out of my little shallow dive into chaos there, and but that's the beauty of complexity. These things are unpredictable, but a little bit of digital issues there. But there's a lot of what you're saying, and just to pick up on the use of it, I just went through a RFP process. And I did in 4 days what would have typically taken me 3 weeks to do, and produced a document I genuinely believe was of a higher quality than I've ever produced before. But I couldn't have done it without me. I had to have the tool helped me improve.
But all that proves is how crap an RFP process is. Because when most people produce RFPs, they just regurgitate text in different forms, and the LLM will always be better. So the productivity improvements for consultancies using LLM just proves how incompetent they were. So if you look at DARPA procurement, which is much more sensible, right? So I've been through several of these. First of all, they find some people they think have something interesting to do. And then they get you all together in a hotel, which you pay for, so you have to pay to be there, and then you all have an argument with each other. Then they write the RFP for the people they want to work with. So you know how to respond to it. Now, that is actually a human-mediated process, whereas LLMs are perpetuating that sort of, we'll write an objective RFP. I mean, you know this. You've been in the service industry. If you didn't write the RFP, why are you responding to it? It is the golden rule in the service sector.
You know, it's interesting because you sort of say about consulting. I wonder whether or not we've been told for the last couple of years that everything is AI. We see all the budgets being piled into AI. We see companies laying off staff wholesale at the moment. We see
they're just using AI as an excuse for that. That's the normal economy down cycle crap.
We see a bunch of macroeconomic factors, especially in the US, and when nobody's really certain what is happening. But we got everybody, the consulting houses, all the big usual suspects, we're telling everybody that everybody had to go AI. AI was going to replace all the jobs. Of course, Jeffrey Hinton and everybody else who from the sort of AI world have been on YouTube telling us it's all doom and gloom. But I wonder whether or not the predominant use of AI is for consulting versus, and it's actually, they're creating a product that isn't actually a product. Yes, it's useful, as we just said. We can use it all the time to help us think better and do things, but it's actually a consulting product, not a replacement for human labor, human expertise, and human skill in the workplace.
That's the problem. So I remember writing a knowledge strategy for the World Bank once. I spent 3 weeks. I charged them about 20, 30 grand, I think. Yeah. In parallel with that, one of the big 5 consultancies was doing exactly the same process. They charged 3 million. The output was a slide set, of which 1/3 was pay us more money to do something else. The other 2/3 was regurgitation of the slides that Larry Prusak and I used when we trained them on knowledge management. So what you built is you built this perverted consultancy system, and it grew on the back of systems thinking and business process reengineering in the 80s and 90s. Which is fundamentally about telling people things which make them comfortable rather than telling them things they need to know. And the consultancies have driven the fad cycle. They maxed out. I mean, I remember you and I talking about this. The day the big consultancies adopted Agile, you knew it was over. Because they do that at the end of a life cycle. They've lost and the people who had the sense to sell at the start of that made a lot of money out of it. The people who waited didn't, right? Because the big consultancies wanted a brand. What I'm hoping with complexity science, which is starting to displace systems thinking, is it will break that management consultancy cycle because it grew on the back of business process reengineering. It grew on the back of structured linear processes, an engineering metaphor, the belief that everything can be designed. Scientific management, which came before it, was actually far more progressive. It was built off a military framework. It was highly adaptive. It automated things which could be automated, but it didn't automate other things. What we're now trying to do is automate everything. And that's a fundamental error. And we're running a big research program on this next year, starting in Vancouver in January. One of the big things we're looking at is what is it that human beings need to do that AI actually can do better than humans? If human beings don't do it for a couple of years, they lose the capacity to exercise judgment.
So let's bring a few of these things in, because Valentina talked about Agile, and of course, for a lot of people who will watch this now or later on the recording, will be focused on the Agile sort of industry, or at least agility as a better concept. We had this mention of Jidoka at the beginning, which is, of course, passionate to me. And you mentioned TPS and the manufacturing side of things, and indeed Valentina mentioned that. And then when we start to look at things I know you've said in previous recordings, webinars, about LLMs being probabilistic engines and sort of guessing the next likely token, as opposed to being actual intelligence, sort of reasoning in the way that we would understand reasoning, it starts to become interesting, because the concept of Jidoka, for those that are new to this, is that Toyota sort of coined this way back in the 1800s, when the original founder, Sakichi Toyota, built what was really considered the first fully automated weaving loom, where the machine had some basic level of intelligence, where it could detect a fault, stop its action, put on a light, and indicate to an operator, hey, I've got a problem. And that was known as automation with the human touch, Jidoka. Jidoka is the Japanese word for automation. Toyota tweaked it a little bit to add the human element. And so this whole concept moving forward, and this is where I am with AI at the moment, is that we have better forms of automation, whatever we mean by the word automation. And that word was actually coined by a Ford vice president many, many years ago, apparently. But whatever we mean by automation, we got better forms of it. And now, but we're still not in the position where we're replacing the person with a machine. We're just augmenting the person, and the automation is still serving the human, which was Sakichi's key point.
If you do that, yes, all right. But if you notice, people are anthropomorphizing AI. And people are talking. I mean, there's this one bloody idiot who thinks we should all have a digital twin who should vote for us because it might be more objective. I mean, that guy's just going bonkers, right? Let me give you 2 examples of where we're using AI where I think it's valid, right? So one is coming back to the work you and I have been doing on Agile, which is to break methods down to their lowest coherent components and allow them to recombine.
Which is where I want to go. Yeah, that's where I want to go.
And that's the point about combination and recombination, which was made earlier, right? Now, the way we're doing that is you can store an assembly, which is a recombination, using it and type in an essay about this is what I would like to do on my project, and using AI to find assemblies which match that. That's useful because I know what the training data set is, right? At the moment, part of the problem with LLMs is over 55% of the internet is now LLM output. So they're training off their own output. So training data sets are key. That also relates to the second thing, and we did this in Ohio. Sorry, whenever you work in medical stuff in Ohio, you're working for Victoria's Secrets, which I always find ironic, all right? What we did there is we captured stories from patients and stories from junior doctors observing senior doctors, because senior doctors are too arrogant to contribute anything other than their own skill. That gave us training data. So if we prematurely discharged somebody, we knew what the micro observations were in the build-up. That's a training data set. So we can create an alert to a doctor to say, look at this patient more carefully. And that's the work we did on DARPA originally on counterterrorism. You can't predict terrorism, but you can alert human beings to pay attention to something. Now that's AI is really good at that. If you control the data sets, and you alert. And the third one, which we just launched, which is called Swarm Compass, that mimics the swarming behavior of bees. We use AI to control the flow of information, but all judgment points are humans. And I think that's a really important point. And that's a hybrid solution. And we're starting to look at actually training AI to be part of a group process. So, for example, 6 humans, 1 AI bot, but nobody knows who the AI bot is. That sort of stuff I can see having value, because it changes perspective. But you can't remove humans as a judgment point, because you will only get, with AI, you only get repetition of past examples. You don't get novelty.
And that's a really interesting comment, because when I start to think about, you said about the training, the AI is training itself off other AI output, which is something we're seeing a lot now. And it's the generation of new knowledge, new synthesis, new ideas that I don't think that we're seeing. And it starts to work. Are we sort of spiraling to sort of some self-perpetuating sort of nonsense? Because
I think that's the problem.
I was talking to somebody yesterday, and it was a comment on LinkedIn. As ChatGPT tends to prompt you constantly about, would you like me to do this next? Would you like me to do this next? And if you keep saying, yes, sure, go on then, it progressively gets worse. It doesn't get better. And I end up having to take chunks of earlier stuff, slap it into Word and sort of munge it around a bit and actually figure out what makes sense. It doesn't. And that's seems to be a symptom of what you're describing.
It is, all right. So it's also addictive, because it keeps telling you how wonderful you are so that you come back, all right? If you notice that, even when it makes a catastrophic error, right? But I think it's important to realize that human beings, art comes before language in human evolution. And we know that one of the functions of art is to break the connection with reality, so we see novelty. It's how metaphor works. It's how abstraction works. We know that human beings, for example, use pheromones to determine whether you trust somebody or not. And that actually has a habituation energy reduction factor. We know that sensory data we take account of, we don't yet fully understand. So the concept that something is just processing text in the dominant language of the world is deficient. So let me give an example. In Welsh, all right, there are no possessive pronouns. You can't actually say I own a car. You can only say the car is with me. Now, AI just can't pick up that sort of subtlety, all right, or understand or think through the implications of it and think what that might mean and connect it with tribal cultures and anthropology. A human being can do that almost automatically. But the danger is we lose the capacity to think abductively. Yeah, so, and this is epigenetics. Within 2 generations, you can lose something which the race has had for centuries. And that's the danger we got at the moment, is we're creating addictive practices, we're creating dependency, we're seeing mental decline in AI users, which is faster than we expected. The danger is we could meet them halfway in terms of the intelligence tests.
So let's go back to this You started talking a little bit about assemblies, and I know that Valentina had introduced this idea of combining or recombining tools. And let's try and bring some of this together a little bit. So the work you clearly you've been leading, and I've been involved in at some level, is this idea of we've got lots of tools, methods, techniques, approaches. We talked about this a lot in my work in the flow system, your work in complexity science and other fields, where we have a variety of capabilities available to us. AI is just a new capability in different forms. But rather than sort of follow a prescriptive framework, and following a prescriptive framework with AI is an absolutely hideously dangerous thing to do, in my opinion, especially as it's creating the framework on the fly. But we are in a position where we can now look at context, and we've always talked about context. We can look at this plethora, this multitude of tools, techniques, methods, and approaches, all of which are effective if used appropriately in context. You know, the Sharpie is very effective, as is the phone, used in the appropriate context. And then we can combine tools or elements of tools, or break tools down into smaller component parts and recombine them and use them in a way that's more effective. Talk to me a little bit about that and where AI fits into that, Dave.
So I think you can see this if you go back to the original Snowbird thing, all right? So Scrum was there, all right? Scrum had come out of about 10 years of practice. I reckon Kinevin took 20 years to get right. We haven't launched a single method or tool yet which didn't go through 5 or 6 years in experimental development before it came into the field. What started to happen with the framework wars is people would throw things together really quickly, right? There are a lot of books on this, and we know some of the main offenders on this is grab a concept, draw some pretty colorful pictures, write a book and sell a training course, all right? And one person has specialized this for their entire career and continues to get away with it with no substance or background behind it, right? But then the trouble was people got the granularity wrong. So finely grained things are key in complexity for scaling. So if we take Scrum, and this is the example you and I have used, and you're co-creator of this as much as anything else. I had the original Hexi concept, but you brought it into Agile and Flow, right? There's no reason why I shouldn't replace a sprint with a 2-month time box. There's absolutely no reason, right? And what we've done is we've created, UI and others have created kits that allow that to happen, which will launch virtually soon. So instead of actually having a framework, which I have to learn everything, I can actually pick and mix, to use that phrase from British supermarkets for kids with sweets. I can pick and mix things in combination, but then there's a key metaphor here. So I go walking a lot, right? That's why I've got the Lake District t-shirt on at the moment. If I arrive in an area, I can go to the app I use, all right, which is Outdoor Active. And I can say I want to walk, which will take me 3 hours, 2 hours, 5 hours, and it will search through other people's walks and come up with one. Yeah. Or I can just say any other walks around here, I can click on them, but then I can take that walk and I can modify it. I can add another section in, I can take something out, I can change the timing factor. So what we're really saying with the whole Agile community, this is what the kits are about, and we just launched them for Estround as well, is what you need to do is to put things together in different combinations, but then find something that somebody has done before, but don't take it for granted, modify it. And that's what we call an assembly. And that's where AI comes in, is AI can suggest assemblies. It can look at what other people have done when they've modified it. And I'll come back to this is the absolute key point. Because we can control the training data sets, they have validity. If you don't know the training data sets, you can't trust the output. But the Chinese have got this much better than the Americans, by the way. They set up the legal structure by which you can't sell AI unless you declare its training data sets.
So that's an interesting thing, because I talked to Simon Wardley with you when we were in Budapest a few months ago about that, and he was talking a lot about the training data set issue. And then I was at the University of North Texas giving on a panel, and a PhD student remonstrated with me and said, no, the Chinese don't release the training data sets, the Americans do. And I went, I'm not sure that's true. And the thing is, so the interesting thing is, if we don't know how they're being trained, how do we trust the responses they're giving us?
Okay, if this offends any American audience, I don't apologize, all right? I was giving a presentation to some very senior bankers the other day and said, they said, what's the problem with AI? And we were on a roll. So I said, the problem is most AI has been written by misogynist white males in their 30s on the west coast of America who take Ayn Rand seriously after puberty, which I regard the grounds for commitment to a mental hospital, right? Mass laughter is now being copied and not properly attributed. But the fact is the training data sets come from a very specific cultural milieu and a very specific language group. It's not even American culture, it's a very narrow culture. And I mean, the MIT bookshop is my favorite bookshop on the planet, all right? So, and I said to my wife last time, I said, look, they gave me free bags. And she said, what did you spend in order to, kind of made the point, right? But there's one book I refused to buy, and it was Correlation is Causation. Yeah, and that's the trouble. You've got people in AI who genuinely think correlation is causation. And that's really scary, because it means, I've said this several times, what they're inviting us to is a utopia, but they can't tell us what the utopia is. They're just asking us to trust them. And that normally ends up with a dystopia.
So let's talk about some practical things for people who are sort of working in the challenging world of commerce at the moment. And we know that LLMs or AI, if people prefer to call it all AI, is probabilistic. So it's guessing the next thing to say. It's guessing what it should respond. It's not truly reasoning. It's probabilistic forecasting for the folks out there that are Monte Carlo obsessed with estimation. It's the same type of idea. It's trying to guess what's
going
coming
back
next.
To idiot to Budapest again, aren't you? Well, sorry,
not going there, Dave. Not going there at all. But you made a comment. I wrote this comment down the other day, and you may or may not remember it. Once we stop pretending LLMs think like humans, we can finally use them on their own terms for compression, synthesis, acceleration, and scaffolding, not replacing judgment, but extending it. And that is the concept of Jidoka in a nutshell.
That's my point. So that's what we're doing with swarm intelligence. We're saying, look, AI is brilliant at saying, we got these patterns, we put something out, human beings interpret it. We look at the patterns. AI is much better as humans at practically saying, well, the people who thought like that, let's check it with these people. So we go through multiple iterations. So AI is brilliant at that flow, but we still keep humans as the judgment nodes. Yeah. So for example, as I'm doing this practice now, I just sent out one to UCL from a lecture. It took me 20 minutes. Take the transcription, throw it into an OLM, drop it into a processing template, add the slides. They've got a white paper and they've got the transcript. And that's a hugely valuable asset, all right? But I know how the thing is trained, and I also know I'm giving it the input. I'm not using it to generate the input, right? And I think that's the key principle.
I think that's a key thing. And actually what you just described was a really great little tiny use case where you've got this tool. So we start to talk about an assembly of tools and methods and approaches. So we have some problems or context or challenges or whatever the working environment we're in. And we want to try and find a way forward, whatever forward means, solve a problem, find the next thing we need to do. So we start to be able to leverage the various different tools and techniques we have. Now, when we take AI, I'll use an AI, whether it's Gemini or GPT, which are my two favorite, just because I have subscriptions included with other things I pay for. And I will actually tell it the things I've got. I'll tell it the tools I've got, all the research I've done, all the analysis I've done. Even the other day, I had an oscilloscope. I was sampling some waveforms from a vacuum tube amplifier. And I took some photographs of the waveforms and I gave it GPT and I said, analyze these for me. And it gave me hints and tips and clues as to what to go test, where to connect test probes up, other measurements to take testing results from to determine potential faulty components. But for me, in the office environment, in the software development environment, in the hardware data center environment, whatever context you're in, manufacturing context environment, A3 problem solving environment, I can now take the things I know and put it in and ask it to do something with those. I can then take the output of that and do further experiments using other tools that it might suggest that it knows I have access to, or methodologies or techniques or approaches or whatever. It's not just a physical tool. So I'm now starting to use the AI in a way to make me more effective, but it's going down the assembly and into that sort of direction of assemblages, Dave.
And then granularity matters, all right? So let's go back to object orientation in programming, which I still think we neglect, all right? And microservices are not the same thing. Using AI to generate an object where you know what output should come from an input, you can control. Using this to generate the whole system is too bloody dangerous. Right? So if we get the object granularity right, you can use AI for code generation because it's not extensive. And if you look at the evidence at the moment, AI is quite good at greenfield code, but bad at brownfield code. Because human beings can see the implications of things which AI can't. So I think if we take a complexity principle, is to work with more finely grained material, where we know what the input out should be, we can start to use AI for productivity improvements. But if we use it for coarsely grained material, we're creating a black box where we don't know it's wrong until it's wrong disastrously, right? So and that's the key principle.
Could we use the AI to help us develop that finer grain from the sort of more macro view we've
No,
got?
I don't. Well, yes and no, all right? I mean, I said, let me give the example. So I took my speech and I said, okay, here it is, all right? The transcript was just crazy. So I said, put some headings in the transcript. And it was 80% good and 20% really wrong, right? You can't afford to be 20% wrong in software code.
No.
Right. Now, I remember when I was working on the air traffic management system at Helsinki, which I'm still proud of because I did a lot of the UX design. But we actually had 3 teams working, any mission critical software had 3 teams working on it in parallel without knowledge of each other, because that was the only way to make it error-proof. Yeah? Now, you couldn't do that with AI because what we had is different human perspectives on the system. And the danger is people, and we've seen this in Boeing and other companies, they've gone downhill really quickly because they've lost the human tacit knowledge element in the interests of automation. And AI is going to make that process worse rather than better. Yeah, the aircraft engineers who used to run Boeing 20 years ago would not have allowed some of the current things to go on. Yeah. So I think there's this general business environment about productivity improvement, which is a problem in its own right. It ends up costing more money in the long term, but it saves you money in the short term. And because executives don't expect to stay with a company for more than 1 to 2 years, asset stripping for a couple of years and let some other poor bugger pick up the consequence is actually a society norm which we need to address, and we can address that legally. Yeah.
That's American corporate culture, I'm afraid. So some of the reading I was doing on this in the run up to this conversation, and some of what the industry heavyweights are talking about, and they may be all the West Coast sort of hippie agilists that you mentioned earlier on in your comment about training data. But some of the things that AI are going to fundamentally shift, and one of the things that I started using the other day, just because I was busy with both hands, was speaking to the damn thing. So I turned on the AI voice and I started to have a conversation with some artificial dude about the things this is a key thing, because talking to computers will replace menus and buttons and UIs and mice and keyboards.
Now, let's be really careful here. So the Australians have very sensibly banned kids from Facebook. Facebook is being withdrawn from Australian kids at the moment. That's happening. Yeah. I know of 5 cases now of suicide by people talking to AI.
Yeah, I have read those cases, and it's
because your problem is, if you're dealing with text, you understand it's text. If you're dealing with voice, you start to give it false authority. So we need to think about how human beings respond to this. And the use of AI in coaching is really scary. It's also, by the way, if you don't know it, is being penetrated by bad actors, so they can actually get the AI to feed stuff to cause you to commit suicide.
Well, there is a YouTuber I watch who has jailbroken all the AI engines and talks to them, and some of the horrific things he manages to get them to sort of achieve, including putting the AI on robotics and having them walk in the street and do all sorts of crazy things. But the reason I'm mentioning this is that we get into the world where platforms are replacing apps. And so now we've got platforms with lots of mini apps, features, functions, or capabilities, which are all standalone, which can be now called. So when we start to look at assemblies, it's sort of the digital equivalent of what you and I talk about, which is these, and even if you went back to object orientation, these small functions that we build, these discrete functions we can call anytime and use them, but now these functions are able to evolve.
Which is
not
okay
just stay...
if the scaffolding is designed by humans, but not if it isn't, all right? What we got at the moment is the equivalent of working out which side of the road we're going to drive on by random interactions at the start of every day. And that's kind of like foolish because you don't know what the hell will happen. So if you're going to have an object-based system with AI in it and multiple apps and platform-based, you've got to architect it properly. And we're not, and this is one of my big frustrations in complexity science, by the way, is the software industry likes the concept of complexity, not because it understands complexity, but it gives them an excuse to say we don't have to deliver on time and to budget because it's complex. Yeah. Now, actually, complexity really requires you to radically rethink architecture, and that work is not being done in IT.
See, you just made a comment there that was important, and I know we're getting on to Q&A because I can see a whole bunch of questions flowing in the chat now, but one of the last point I wanted to make, which is a point which you were alluding to, Dave, maybe, is effort will no longer matter because it's easy to build on top of AI, meaning years of engineering work can be copied almost instantly. And the sort of the wanton greed of American corporate culture, which is where I live in Texas, the 2-year executive tenure and we don't care, I'm on to the next thing.
If I'm being genuine, I mean, well, two things. I had several arguments with senior IBM executives, particularly Junior Amati, but I remember one major argument with Sam Polizano. He said we can use Fountain Park, and he genuinely thought Fountain Park was AI, which I thought was funny. We can use it to replace middle managers. And I said, so where the hell do you think senior managers are going to come from? He hadn't thought about that. All right. So and this is one of the big things we're looking at next year, the process of learning, of understanding, of going through the process. I mean, I built 3 boats with my father in the garage. He didn't let me put a screw in unsupervised for 2 years because I had to build habits. It wasn't just text-based knowledge, it was habits. Yeah, it was the ability to have energy efficient processing. I mean, to be honest, a bumblebee has a brain which uses less energy than Google Maps and is more effective. And we should start to think about that, right? But then just on the wider point, I mean, given that the American economy is now highly dependent on massive investment into AI, when that bubble bursts next year, there's a question about whether the dollar can survive as the main reserve currency. So we might actually be working off different models. Yeah?
Buy Bitcoin and invest in nuclear energy, not investment advice. Alvina, save us from ourselves.
Yes. I actually find this really interesting and I love where this is going. But yes, it's time to bring the audience in. We have some questions in the Q&A, a lot of comments in the chat, as you already mentioned, Nigel. So I will start with the first one, which is directed to Valentina.
Okay.
Okay, so Valentina, you mentioned that each company should recombine tools and practices based on its own context. How can leaders recognize when their current way of working is no longer suitable and it needs to evolve?
Okay, that's a very important question. Leaders need to be aware of a few signs that tell them their way of working isn't working anymore. For example, if the company can't adapt quickly to market changes or customer needs, it's time to reflect. Another sign is when decisions become slow or difficult because people feel stuck in rigid processes. And another example is if there is a lot of resistance to change or a growing frustration among teams. This is another clear signal that something needs to change. In these cases, leaders need to face the reality, be open to feedback, and it's not so easy, and be ready to evolve. It's not about starting over, but recognizing that organizations go through cycles. And when a way of working no longer fits, it's time to explore new approaches.
Thank you. Thank you, Valentina. Hope this answers the question. Okay, I'll continue with another one, which was sent some time ago in the chat. I hope you, Dave and Nigel, get where this context is coming from. So, on new capability is to surface inconsistencies in large collections of work artifacts. Surface hidden dependence, a bit like a compiler. Is that part of what you now describe?
Yes, but how you do it is critical. All right. So again, I mean, I'll get the medical example is a good one. If I've got 6 months of patient journeys indexed by them, all right, it's very important you get quantitative data, you don't just have text. So we train the AI both on the text, but also on the way that the person has interpreted their data. And at the moment, AI is being trained off text, which is not the same thing. You need that interpretive layer. So if I've got that 6 months of that, and I've got 6 months of doctor observation, so I've got this contrast of patient experience with doctor experience, yeah, then that creates a training data set. And if I know I had an adverse outcome, I can then say, I've got a similar pattern, look at this. Yeah? So using the AI to find the anomalies and say these are anomalies, I'm more problematic. I think that's a problem. Saying to human beings, you need to look at this because it may be anomalous, that's different. Yeah. So that's what we call it. Yeah, that's attention prompting. Yeah.
I have nothing to add.
Okay, wonderful. Then we continue with another one from Paul. As you look at the market now, the downfall of Agile, the limitations of AI and economic downturn, where are you? Optimistic? Where do you see opportunities for people in the change adoption field?
Well, let me have an opinion here. So, Dave, I'm just looking at some of the other questions, and there's some fantastic questions. So I really want us to get to them. But look, downfall of Agile. So the problem. There is no issue with agility. There is no issue with some of the things that Valentina was talking about, recognizing, events and triggers and changes and being able to respond rapidly. Business agility is how fast can you respond to the way the market, the economy, the political climate changes. That's agility, and that's like gravity. It just exists. It has never gone away, and it's always been there. The nonsense that was PDF certification has gone away, thankfully, and this whole thing about just selling you more and more consultants who just told other people how to do things. So that's gone. So let's just park that for the time being. The limitations of AI, I think the reality is people were selling, and still are in some circumstances, selling companies the dream that AI is your new robotic workforce. It will replace these lazy humans, and it will be cheaper, faster, better, quicker, all these sort of things. And that's just nonsense. And we're starting to see that's nonsense. Will it go into the physical world? Yes, what we call embodied AI. Will it create lots of opportunity? Yes, and in the digital space. I'm using it, Dave's using it. We're finding it a very valuable tool. It's a better screwdriver, fantastic, but it's not a replacement of. So there's opportunities there. Now, and when we talk about economic downturn, there are economic challenges globally at the moment. You'd have to be blind not to see them if you're reading the news and seeing the opportunities out of there. And nobody really knows what's going to happen. I watched the crypto markets, and I was watching a program this morning on exactly what's happening with Bitcoin, and going, well, and everybody's going, we really don't know what's happening. And that really is where we are at the moment. But there are opportunities. I think there's opportunity for people to leverage technology, as there has been in every other technology cycle. There's opportunities for us to look at how we can apply them to, in my space, in lean thinking and in elimination of non-value added activity, how we can leverage the technologies and the tools and the better automation to improve the way we build products and services, and we provide value for end customers, end users, which, ultimately what most corporations are looking to do. So I think there's an opportunity there. I think there's a lot of noise. I think that there's clearly a bubble. How big the bubble is and how much it will burst and how much impact there'll be, we'll wait and see. The energy aspect of AI is huge. We don't have the electricity resources in the USA to power all the AI that people want to build. So there's going to have to be some decisions there. And it is going to mean a difference in where investment is happening and where and what is the focus. I live in Texas. We have barely enough electricity to power our air conditioning in the summer and our heating in the winter. So, you know, this idea of building gargantuan data centers everywhere, which are just powering, you know, that are consuming city blocks worth of electricity is a pipe dream. So there has to be some balance there. Dave, you were going to add something into this.
Yeah, so let me get really practical first and then get really scary, right? Sorry, I sit on depressing think tanks and I feel I should share the problems, all right? So one very practical thing you can do is, if you think you can replace your workforce with AI, you may be partially right, but if you're wrong, you won't get them back again. So we're running programs with companies at the moment, which if anybody wants to know about, get in touch, where we're getting people to identify skills that their fellow workers have, which are not being used by the company. So what we're saying is, well, for 6 months, get your workers to do something and let them parallel and check the AI. You haven't lost them if you do it. And that's a really practical thing. And it may produce qualities and capabilities you didn't know. That engineer's got an anthropology degree. Why don't you use them on UX, for example, right? But then I think you've got to get more real about this. So sometime in the next 10 years, 30 to 50 million people will die one day from heat death. And Texas is one of the candidates.
Yeah.
Because the air conditioning will fail. How are we going to respond to that as a race? I mean, I'm trying desperately to get two governments at the moment to get ready for that, because it might be opportunity for people to think differently. Go to South Africa, where they've learned to manage without electricity for half the day. Where's your AI going to go if you don't have electricity available, because that's coming? Oh, and by the way, what are you going to drink? Because the AI consumption of water is really scary. Right? So we're not thinking through some of the implications of this. That was my point about we've been promised a utopia in which these wonderful things which are accelerating climate change will magically change climate change for us. And I made the point on a blog recently, the AI gurus have all inherited the extreme Protestant concept of the rapture. Yeah, and it's going to bring along this wonderful state in which the elite will be taken up to heaven and God help the rest of us, all right? We'll all be not even in purgatory. So I think we've got to get very real about this as a society. We've got to realize, and to come back really pragmatic, I say I walk a lot. I always have 3 GPS devices with me. It's transformed my walking, particularly in my 70s, all right? Because I'm less reserved as I was. But at least once a month, I walk with map and compass, and at least once a year, I walk without. Because I don't want to lose those skills, because I'm going to need those skills if the GPS breaks down. And navies around the world are training their officers to use sextants because they know they may not GPS in warfare. So just think about that.
After the solar flare stuff the other day, that's not as daft as it sounds. Albina, there's a comment or a question from Chauncey, and they were asking, they may have missed it, but is hybrid project management, what is the rise you are seeing with the push into this direction? So I have a short comment on that. I know we're short of time, but the whole point about a hybrid approach is an assembly-based approach. It's where you basically, rather than following a prescriptive way of doing things, be that a waterfall approach, an agile approach, some framework like SAFe or otherwise, is that you are taking the things that work for you at the time they work in the context you're in. And as the context evolves over time, you're varying the tools, the techniques, the methods, and approaches. It's not a one-size-fits-all. It's not a rigid, structured approach anymore. It's building what's effective. Dave, do you want to add something to this?
There's something really important in project management. I mean, for my many and various sins, I used to teach just war theory at West Point. There are complex reasons for that going back to the 70s. And I got very concerned about the young officers. So we ended up deploying them into Afghanistan and saying, like my patients, like my doctors, if you keep your field records up to date as things happen, you don't have to write a patrol report. And that gave us hugely improved military intelligence. We've now been doing that in major project management. Is you want real-time observations at scale from people doing the projects. You don't want retrospective reports. That is then also training data sets, which I can use for AI to say this project is starting to go wrong and get that before anybody will see it through conventional reporting. But again, it comes back to training data sets, and it comes back to micro observations at scale with human intelligence incorporated into the training data sets, not just text and tokens. You've got to add that human intelligence level.
Thank you. Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Nigel. I think this was our final question in order to respect everyone's time. Thank you for understanding, and happy to keep the discussion going offline. I would like to say thank you to our lovely panelists. Of course, I'll start with the lady, Valentina, Nigel, and Dave. Thank you so much for everyone who joined us. We'll be sending the recording shortly, and we hope that the conversation sparks ideas and drives meaningful changes in your organizations. Wishing you a lovely rest of your day.